All right, let's dive into a topic that's, well, it's incredibly personal and pretty complex from a psychological standpoint. Intermittent consent. We're going to break down the science behind a pattern of behavior that can feel just so confusing and, honestly, really damaging. So let's get right into it. You know that feeling, right? That question that can just take over your every waking thought. One minute, you feel like the most important person in the world, and the next, you feel like you're being pushed out the door. This feeling, this intense uncertainty, is really the heart of what we're exploring today. And this really gets to the core of it. You've got this whiplash between two extremes. On one side, there's closeness, there's consent, everything feels right. And on the other, it's withdrawal, it's rejection. This unpredictable swing between hot and cold, that's what creates such a powerful and often really painful state of mind. Now, it's so easy to just write this off as, a bad romance or just good old-fashioned heartache. But the source material we're looking at frames it in a totally different way. It argues this isn't just a feeling. It's actually a clinical state called emotional dysregulation. Basically, a breakdown in your ability to manage your own emotional responses. So, what's the deal? Why is this pattern so incredibly hard to walk away from? Why do we get so stuck in it? Well, the answer isn't in some romance novel. It's actually rooted in the principles of behavioral psychology. So let's get into the science and see how this all works. Okay, so the key concept here is something called intermittent reinforcement. The best way to think about it is like a slot machine in Vegas. You don't win every single time you pull the lever, right? But it's the possibility that you might win on the next pull that keeps you glued to that machine. It's the sheer unpredictability of the reward that makes the behavior so addictive and so hard to stop. And look, this isn't some new age theory. The foundational psychologist B.F. Skinner proved this principle decades ago. His work showed pretty definitively that an inconsistent reward creates a way stronger compulsion than one you can always count on. So the point is, this is a known, powerful psychological mechanism. So what you get is this powerful addiction loop. It all kicks off with that inconsistent response, that confusing mix of yes and no. This plunges you into a state of really deep uncertainty and psychological confusion. And from there, your brain gets hooked. It becomes obsessed with trying to solve that uncertainty, which creates a mental addiction. You're just caught in this loop of anxiety, followed by relief, and then a constant craving for that next yes. But it's not just about behavior, right? It goes way deeper than that. We've got to look at what's actually happening inside our brains and how this all connects to our most fundamental need for security in our relationships. Now, this is where it gets absolutely wild. The work of anthropologist Helen Fisher, she found that when we go through a romantic rejection, our brains light up in the exact same areas as when we experience physical pain. So that feeling of being hurt, it's not just a metaphor. To your brain, it's real pain. And this is such a crucial distinction to make. If someone gives you a clear, final no, yeah, it hurts like hell, but that pain eventually leads to healing and moving on. But with intermittent rejection, you get all of that pain, but it's mixed with this little flicker of hope that things will change. And that combination, pain plus hope, it just creates this endless, exhausting cycle that stops you from ever truly healing. And this whole cycle is being fueled by a chemical in your brain, dopamine. The anticipation, the hope of a potential reward, like getting that closeness back, it causes a dopamine rush. But when that system is constantly firing off without any real resolution, it leads to obsessive thinking, it messes with your sleep, and it causes this profound emotional instability. You're literally caught in a dopamine trap. This brings us right to something called attachment theory. Its founder, John Bowlby, he figured out that when a caregiver or in an adult relationship, a partner is inconsistently available, it creates this very specific kind of insecurity. It's known as anxious attachment. And we're not talking about some minor issue here. Anxious attachment is a huge deal. It leads to this intense, gut-wrenching fear of being abandoned, a constant state of doubt about everything. And that can tragically spiral into possessiveness, which then becomes an attempt to control the other person. In that state, rational thought, it pretty much goes right out the window. So up until now, we've really been focused on the internal, personal experience. But the source material makes a really bold and frankly disturbing connection. It argues that this private psychological chaos can actually escalate into a very real public danger. And this right here is the central thesis. The argument is that many acts of violence we see in these situations, they don't just spring from lust or a simple desire for sex. They erupt from that profound psychological confusion and dysregulation that we've been talking about. So why does this happen? The source argues that it's not happening in a vacuum. It points to a social context where these problems are allowed to grow. A lack of education about our own emotions, absolutely no training on how to handle rejection, and a fundamental misunderstanding that real, true consent has to be clear. All of these failures create a perfect storm for this confusion to turn dangerous. So when a person's mental state just fractures under all this pressure, the source suggests that energy has to go somewhere. It can lead down one of two really destructive paths. It can turn inward, leading to things like suicidal thoughts and just a completely shattered sense of self. Or it can explode outward, resulting in assault, attempts to control, and violence against the person they see as the source of all that confusion. Okay, so that's all pretty heavy. If this is the problem, what on earth is the solution? Well, the source material argues that we have to stop seeing this as just one person's private relationship problem and start treating it as a collective social responsibility. And there's some incredible science to back this up. The Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, his research showed that the human brain finds deep uncertainty to be more stressful than a guaranteed bad outcome. Think about that. In other words, a clear, firm no is actually psychologically kinder and safer than a confusing maybe. The source also brings in this piece of ancient text, not as a moral judgment on anyone, but as a timeless behavioral warning. The core idea here is that inconsistent, wandering behavior is just inherently destructive, both to the person doing it and to the people around them. And this all boils down to the crucial takeaway. The solution is really an education. We have to teach the immense value of a clear no. We have to teach the profound sense of safety and trust that comes from consistency in our words and our actions. And we have to teach the very real psychological danger that comes with uncertainty. So at the end of the day, we need to completely reframe this whole conversation. What we're talking about here isn't the normal ups and downs of love or sex. We are talking about a serious issue of mental health, a gap in our education system, and a matter of social responsibility for how we communicate with each other. And that leaves us with this final, really powerful question to think about. If we all agree that a clear no is a form of protection, then we have to confront the flip side. Is a confusing yes/no a form of destruction? It's a challenging thought for sure, and one worth sitting with long after this explainer is over.